Hey guys, today we're working on actually 3 different standards all at once. We're looking at 5.2a, which is simplify using I, which we'll talk about what I is in just a second. 5.2b, which is multiplying complex numbers, and 5.2c, which is adding and subtracting complex numbers. So let's make sure we take the time to get our notes down now. I'll hold this here for just a second so you can copy these down, and I'll move this up so that you can get the last stuff you need. Okay. Ew, that's gross. Yeah. Hairs everywhere. Weird. Alright, now that weird stuff's out of the way, let's talk about what this I is. The I stands for the imaginary number. And here's why we need an imaginary number. If we're trying to take the square root of a negative number, nothing real will multiply by itself. A positive times a positive is a positive, and a negative times a negative is still a positive. So we cannot get a negative number. But there is a way that we worked out. They needed a way so that they could do this for a variety of reasons. It's used all over the place, and you're actually using it on your cell phone all the time when you log on to it. We'll get to applications later. So I is the imaginary number, and they said that I is the number whose square root is -1, i.e. I squared equals -1, and then we can thus then say that I equals the square root of -1 by taking the square root of both sides. The square root of I squared is I, the square root of -1 is the square root of -1. So here's what this allows us to do. If we're trying to take the square root of -9, we're going to rewrite this as +9 times -1, right? Everybody okay with this so far? Rewriting this just like we would like after the tree or something. So you can break 9 down if you want to. I know it's a perfect square, so I'm going to say 9 is, the square root of 9 is 3. So that's going to come to the outside. And then the square root of -1 is this I thing. We said the square root of -1 is equal to I, and there's no square root sign here. So when we do this, this -1 is going to turn into I. So the square root of -9 is really equal to 3i. And that's it. That's all we have to do. So let's do a couple more, a little bit more harder examples in here. The square root of -20, we know that we can say 1, or if you want to break this down further,
you can say it's 2 times 2 times 5, and then you've got a pair of 2's, and you can pull them out. That's fine. I know I can take the square root of 4. It's going to come to the outside and become 2. I can't take the square root of 5, so it's going to stay on the inside. And again, the square root of -1 is this special number we call I. So square root of 4 is 2. Can't take the square root of 5, so we're going to leave this on the inside. And the square root of -1 is I. And this is the whole answer. When I write this 2i, I acts kind of like a variable in where you write it, so it comes after numbers. Okay, last one. 3 square root of -8. So I'm going to break this down like we have been doing. I know that -8 is -1 times 8, which is 2 times 2 times 2. And then I've got a pair of 2's in here, and I know I can take the square root of this as well. So 3 times the square root of 2 times 2 is 2. The square root of -1 is I, square root of 2. So 3 times 2 is going to give us 6. We have an I, square root of 2. And we can just leave it like that right now. Okay, so that's 5.2a, which is simplifying using I. And this is, we're going to use this kind of in the process of doing our adding and subtracting and multiplying of what are called complex numbers. So complex numbers are kind of written down here. You can kind of see what they are in example 2 and 3 and 1 down here. Complex numbers are a number with both a real and imaginary part. With both a real and imaginary part. And they are always written in the form a plus bi, where the bi is the imaginary, and then the a is the real. So that's the real, this is the imaginary stuff. So we're going to graph these later, but right now we're just going to practice adding and subtracting them. That acts exactly like variables for adding, subtracting, and multiplying. There's just like one little extra thing we're going to have to do. So when we look at a problem, which is 2 plus 4i plus 4 minus I, we're going to add our like terms together just like we added our like terms together in the past. So we're going to say, oh, number and number. 2 plus 4 is going to give us 6. Pretty straightforward. I's and some i's. So 4i minus 1i is a total of 3 i's.
So 4i minus 1i is 3i. So 2 plus 4 gives us 6. 4i minus I is 3i. And this is fine to leave it like this. And it's kind of backwards. We're used to writing our variable term first and then our numbers. Complex numbers are always written real part first, which is our number, plus our imaginary part, which is this other part. Okay, so that's adding and subtracting. It's very straightforward. You do the exact same thing. You just add the coefficients of your i's together, and then you bring it all down, and then you just write it in the correct format. Numbers first, imaginary part second. Multiplying is very similar to what we've seen before. So this is 3i times I. We're just going to multiply the exact same way. So 3 times our imaginary 1 right here is going to give us 3. And then we know that I times I is going to give us I squared. And then here's the additional thing that we have to do. Complex numbers are never written with I squared. They're only with a real and a regular point I. And there's a way to transform this into regular. So if we look back at our definition of an imaginary number, the definition of an imaginary number is that I squared is equal to -1. So if I Squared is equal to -1. We can say squared is equal to 3 times -1, which is going to give us -3. And again, we can say this because I squared equals -1, so I replace I squared with -1. Alright, last example for us, and then it's time to get some problems. Let's say we have a coefficient in the front and a coefficient here that's not 1. We're just going to multiply them like we always have. So 2i times -5i, well 2 times -5 is -10, and I times I is I squared. And again, we notice we have an I squared. We don't like I squared, we only want i's. So I squared, we're going to replace, just like we did over here on the left, we know that I squared equals -1, so we're going to replace I squared with -1. So -10 times -1 is going to give us +10. Alright, so that's that. Let's make sure we get our practice and let's get to work.